Before you can bake the cake of your dreams, you'll need to learn how to prep your cake pan for baking. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 different ways to prepare a cake pan. Be sure to stay until the end where I show you the outcome of each pan prep method and discuss the pros and cons of each. If you're new to my channel and want to learn more about cake decorating, subscribe for more tips and tutorials. The first way is to use non-stick baking spray. It's pretty simple. Just spray the baking spray into the pan like so. And when you're doing this, be mindful to spray into the corners. That's where cake tends to stick. Since our first cake is done, I'm going to sit it on a wire rack to cool for about 10 minutes. Once the cake has cooled a bit, I'm going to invert the cake like this. To remove it from the pan, and from here I allow it to continue to cool to room temperature. Never allow a cake baked in a pan prepared with baking spray to actually cool inside the pan. The spray could solidify and make the cake difficult to remove from the pan later. The other method for preparing cake pans involves using parchment paper. Because baking spray sometimes contains flour, if you're making a gluten-free cake, using parchment paper to prepare your pan is the way to go. The first thing I will do is take a piece of parchment paper from the roll, and I start to fold it in half twice like this. Next, I start to fold it into a point. I turn the pan over, and next I align the point of the parchment paper with the center of the pan. With a pair of scissors, I very carefully cut the parchment along the outer edge of the pan. I flip the pan back over and unfold the parchment. And here we have a parchment circle that matches the inside of our 8-inch pan. Next, I press the parchment into the bottom of the pan. If there is some excess parchment along the sides, I crease it into the corner and allow the parchment paper to go up the side of the pan a bit. Now that'll come in handy later. The next step is to take a piece of parchment paper and carefully tear it or cut it into 2 strips. These will line the sides of our pan. If the parchment is rolling in a certain direction, it's helpful to place the strip of parchment to where it's rolling toward the sides of the pan. Once the strips are against the side of the pan, I finally place the round piece of parchment into the bottom of the pan. The slightly creased edges of the round parchment actually help to hold the strips in place on the side of the pan. I repeat the same steps with my pan that's been prepared with parchment paper, pouring in the remaining batter. I place this cake on a wire rack. I'll allow the cake to cool for about 20 minutes before removing the parchment paper from the sides in preparation of removing the cake from the pan. And just like I did with the other cake, I invert it to remove it from the pan. And once the cake is flipped, I remove the parchment paper from the bottom of the cake. And finally, I allow the cake to cool to room temperature. Next, we'll use butter and flour to prep our cake pan. We start by taking 2 tablespoons of butter and melting it in a microwave-safe bowl. Next, I pour the butter into the pan, moving it around to coat the inside of the pan. can be a bit difficult to get the butter up the sides of the pan, so I'll use my finger to coat that part. Next, I sprinkle some flour into the pan and gently tap it around to coat the inside of the pan. Now be sure to flip the pan upside down to remove the excess flour. And finally, I pour in my batter. After the cake is baked, I invert the pan to release the cake just as before. Here you can see a thin crust that has formed as a result of using the butter and flour method. I'm using a silicone pastry brush to remove most of this crust. To minimize the amount of crust, be sure to remove as much excess butter and flour from the pan before adding your batter. Have you learned something new so far? If so, go ahead and hit the like button now. And if you're ready to take your cake decorating skills to the next level, check out my Cake Decorating Beginner's Guide, which is linked in the description below. The cake that went into the parchment pan is on the right, and the cake whose pan was prepared with baking spray is on the left. And here is our cake that was baked in the pan prepped with butter and flour. Now to the pros and cons. The biggest advantage to using the baking spray is that the process overall is pretty fast. Prepping the pan this way doesn't take much time at all. The disadvantage is that this particular spray cannot be used in gluten-free baking, and that's because it contains flour. Also, using baking spray can cause your cake to stick to the pan if it is allowed to cool to room temperature. Unlike with the baking spray, parchment paper can be used with gluten-free baking. Parchment paper is also the ultimate non-stick solution. It serves as a barrier between the cake and the cake pan, which makes it easier to remove the cake after it's been baked. Unfortunately, prepping your cake pan with parchment paper is a bit time-consuming, and it does require some extra supplies. The butter and flour method is quite convenient, and that's because it uses ingredients that you have on hand because you're already baking. However, the crust that forms from using this method leaves a lot to be desired. Let me know in the comments below, what method do you use to prep your cake pans? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button below. For more cake decorating tips and tutorials, subscribe to my channel. As always, thanks for watching.